Hello and welcome to Deep Inward, a special Doof crossover event where we super thoroughly dive into Warbo's most longest work after it's finished. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold. Hello to those of you who haven't heard us before.
Hi.
We don't usually talk parahumans, but this was a special bonus that we promised to do when everyone helped us reach a donation goal during our 24-hour packed live stream.
Yes, we did a 24-hour charity live stream when we completed our show called Deep Impact, also on the Doof Media Network. And during that live stream, we got a bunch of donations, and one of the donation rewards was people wanted us to do a special episode where we dove deep into Ward.
Yes.
So that's what you're listening to right now.
Yep, that's right. We're going to go super deep into a 2 million word story in about an hour or so, you know.
Well, no, if people look at their, the duration of their podcast device, they'll see that this is a 40-hour long episode.
Yeah, and don't worry about the last 39 and a half being dead air. That's on your end.
Yes, so if you missed this 24-hour charity live stream all packed up, all of the segments, a lot of the segments are on YouTube. All of them are going to be on YouTube. They're coming out one or two every week.
Yeah, it's 2 a week. There's about 2/3 of it up there now. The rest, come out over the next half a month or so.
Yep. So if you want to check that out, go to Doof Media's YouTube channel. Or if you want more content from us, we also do the Pale Reflections show, which is talking about Wildbow's current web serial, Pale.
Yes, so if you listen to We've Got Ward, which I'm assuming you do, considering you're listening to this,
that's what this is. Yep.
It's pretty much the same thing,
except with us instead of those Scott and Matt scallywags.
Exactly.
All right. So enough housekeeping. Should we, as we say on this show, go deep inward?
Yes, but before we do, I want to get something off my chest.
I said enough housekeeping.
No, this isn't housekeeping so much as me just starting the episode off on a real negative tone, which is obviously what everyone's after.
Yeah.
No, I'm really mad about the name for this special that we're doing, Deep in Ward, because it is so much better.
It's a better name, isn't it?
Yeah, like Deep Impact is a stupid pun based on a movie it turns out neither of us had actually seen.
Nope.
Deep in Ward is not only like just genuinely like better wordplay, but actually suits this story. Like Victoria is such an introspective character. So calling the show Deep in Ward actually makes sense. And so it's kind of aggravating that, we're doing a once-off special with, probably the best name for a podcast we've ever had.
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be a once-off special, Elliot. If people are really keen on it and they tweet at Elliot a lot, we might do a full series of it.
Yeah, and so my Twitter is at ZordLord.
Damn it, fuck. No, you're right. This is a much better name than most of the puns we come up with. So it makes sense that it was an accident and not us coming up with a pun, because otherwise it wouldn't be as good as this.
Everything about this name just frustrates me because it's too good, and it reflects poorly on us.
Yep. Anyway, that weird rant out of the way. Shall we talk about the actual story?
Yes. So let's start with a quick summary of Ward. I'm assuming if you're listening to this, you have read Ward, but well,
it's been like a month. I don't know.
Oh yeah, well, especially if you're like me and you didn't really reread any of it as you go, it's like almost 3 years back for some of it. So we'll just do a quick recap. And again, this whole episode is like full Ward spoilers. So buckle in. I'm going to sort of summarize the story here super broadly, like not even arc by arc, but like a higher level, just to sort of talk about, because I think it's interesting how this story, I think, is kind of clearly divided into some chunks that each tie to a particular part of Victoria's like character's journey, like her growth. Like obviously the first sort of 3 arcs as a whole are just like us meeting Victoria, and then the rest of what will become Breakthrough when she joins up as their temporary coach.
Yep. Very temporary. 3 years or so.
But yeah, so these are the arcs where Victoria gets kicked out of the patrol because she's got powers. She goes job hunting. Like it's all about her sort of finding herself and not being able to hide away anymore. And she's been floating, and now she has to sort of find a purpose for herself.
Yeah, she's kind of 1 or 2 things kick off which force her into a new phase of her life, and she's kind of figuring out how to define herself in that phase.
Yeah, because she kind of got away with hiding herself away when she was in the patrol, and she's not really in a position to do that, and she doesn't want to as much. Like, there's already, I think, growth that's happened between Gold Morning Victoria and the Victoria here that, you know, we sort of briefly get caught up on. And then, so arcs 4 through 6 are super interesting because this is all the Hollow Point stuff and the Fallen Raid, and I really see this as like Victoria being forced to leave her Glory Girl days behind. Like, Hollow Point kind of represents her trying to establish the good old days of hero-villain dynamics. And it fails fucking completely to the point that the Fallen Raid happens. And then, like, you get that iconic moment where they get to the Fallen Raid and there's, like, machine gun fire. And, you know, like, guns were so representative of the rules of the old order. And that's just completely out the window as this raid kicks off.
Yeah.
And then you...
This story really was a full 3-year long period, doesn't it? I'm thinking of this and like, I remember when that was like, oh man, this is like the biggest thing that's happened.
Yeah, it's such an epic, Ward. Like,
remember that? This is how crazy this story is. Do you remember that bit when Kenzie drops a camera on somebody? And at the time, that was like, oh my God, this is the biggest escalation I've ever seen. Can you imagine thinking that?
I mean, you saw the same thing in Worm as well. I think it's a bit of a Wildbow staple where a few arcs in, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe, you know, Taylor, you know, fucked up someone's foot. Yeah. And then, you know, by the end of the story, she's obviously just like taking control of thousands of people and shooting toddlers.
Yeah.
So
yes, she does. Classic Taylor.
Yeah. But yeah, I think also what really focuses all the Hollow Point and the Fallen stuff for me is Rain. Like, obviously there's like a whole bunch of interludes. The story focuses on him, but he represents this idea that Victoria really starts to grapple with, I think, in these 3 arcs of like forgiveness and what people can earn forgiveness for.
Yeah, I think early Victoria definitely feels quite, I don't know, black and white, I guess. Like, she definitely sees things in terms of you're either a hero or you're a villain, right?
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, Rain as a character especially, but this arc starts to really challenge that.
Yeah, well, because Rain represents the Nazis she used to throw into dumpsters, right? Like, in a lot of ways. Like, he's someone who grew up in and then did some extra terrible things of that nature. And he then had a wake-up call and is trying to improve himself and trying to make up for what he did. And Victoria sort of has to grapple with how she feels about that. And that's very textual. I think the bit that best encapsulates that for me is that moment where she's trying to stop Cradle from getting him towards the end of the Fallen Raid. And Cradle has that moment where he's like, Rain took me from me, which is obviously a bit of a line that gets recontextualized later. But it really hits Victoria as like reminding her of, what she went through with Amy. And there's this moment where she's like, fuck, should I? Like, and like I think that was like a bit of a turning point for her when she made the decision that Rain was trying to get better and that was worth helping him for.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of makes me wonder whether, well, actually, I already know the answer to this because I've listened to the interview with Wildbow and Scott and Matt that was on this very feed, probably 2 or 3 episodes back if you scroll up in the podcast app. It almost feels explicitly like it's setting up the idea of Victoria being more willing to, I guess, work with Amy or reconcile with Amy to some extent or allow Amy to reconcile. And that idea never really eventuates as cleanly as Rain's reconciliation takes place, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree that that's where my mind went, and that might have been like an intention of Wabo into making us think, because I think a lot of this story... I think a lot of us went into this story expecting some sort of like redemption arc for Amy or something to some degree, and then the story just sort of keeps going and it just keeps getting worse.
Should we talk about... I don't know if this is in the notes here, but you're kind of a bit of an Amy apologist, or at least you were at the start of the story.
No, I absolutely was at the start of this story, and I could blame tons of things like not having read Worm closely enough, or blah blah. For me, that's not the point. I think what I really took away from Amy in this is like I kept saying, I get Victoria's perspective, but it's obviously bias or whatever, and Amy, she didn't mean it, and then eventually the story just made it clear to me that is not at all the case, and Amy was actually the worst. And I really liked that as I think, and we talked about this way back when we covered Worm on Media MD. What really made me grow to love Worm when I first read it was how the interludes taught me to care about so many characters. Like, Wildbow would introduce a character and I'd be like, they're a piece of shit maybe, or something.
Or
and then
just,
we get an interlude from their perspective,
they're...
and I'd have this whole new idea of who they were. And even if I didn't like them better, I kind of got how they became who they were. And Amy represented a bit of a flip of that for me, where, this was someone who I kept saying, no, she's just misunderstood and she had a really hard time of it. And then we sort of see more of her, and especially by the time you get to her interludes in Arc 16, you're just like, fuck Amy so hard. Like, and I think that was like really actually just as valuable as like the way Worm taught me to try to see other people's perspectives. Ward also was then sort of like, yeah, but sometimes they're just being fucking idiots.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you need to take care of yourself and look out for yourself, right?
Yeah,
and that means not necessarily putting yourself in a perspective where you have to, be a saint in terms of trying to always forgive people who are toxic to you.
Yeah, so like I... What a valuable is, because there's a lot of statements that I said in sort of defense of Amy that I now very much regret saying, and I think it was valuable for me to learn that lesson, especially here in a fictional setting, like so that I can watch out for something like that in real life.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, anyway.
Yes,
that interrupted the plot summary.
So back to the plot summary. So Arc 6, the Fallen Raid, ends with that whole portal debacle, the portals expanding. Yeah. Which, remember when that was like the hugest fucking problem?
That's like nothing compared to, late story stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy to me. It's so crazy to me to think about the consistent, even as, obviously Worm is a story about things escalating, right? Like the word escalation is such a meme around that story. And this story is so much a, response to that, right? Like, a response to the idea of escalation and trauma defining you and talking about how to move on from those traumas. But also, Ward also is this story where things just keep getting bigger and worse.
Yeah,
until the end.
But it's not like, like Taylor was sort of diving headfirst into the escalations to try and do more, whereas Victoria, it's a little bit different, and it's just kind of the problems that keep entering her life are getting bigger, and it's like she's being faced with bigger hurdles, whereas like Taylor was finding hurdle tracks that she could run into.
Yeah, I guess she solves some of these as well, right? Like, the goddess situation is one that is a big escalation, but one that Victoria pushes against and solves.
Yes. So let's get there actually, because we're almost there. So after the portal shebang, Arcs 7 and 8 kick off, and for 7 and 8, I think I'd just sort of summarize them as like society truly starting to like fall apart a bit. Like, this is when a lot of the anti-parahuman stuff really started to come into the story. The portals have obviously sort of fucked everything up, and Victoria launches like her new like hero group network thing, which I think is like her trying to adapt. Like, this is where she takes on what she learned in Arcs 4 through 6, that the old system was falling apart, and she's trying something new. And then that all kind of gets sidetracked and usurped in Arc 9 when Goddess shows up. And I really like this arc, not just because I think it taps into Victoria's like issues with, herself. Like, that's obviously something that very much comes up, is having control over her mental faculties after like what Amy did to her during the Slaughterhouse 9 in Worm.
Yeah.
But I think it also, more interestingly to me, starts to tap into any kind of, belief system and moral righteousness she has. Because she has her old mantra, which, used to come up a lot, like, follow the law. If that's not clear, do what's right. If that's not clear, like, reach out. And what happens then is that whole ordering gets completely sort of twisted by Goddess. And I think from that point, a little bit invalidated. Like, it's something that is called into question, because the whole point of it relies on you sort of knowing what each of those things are, and Goddess called that into question.
Yeah, I think when I was first reading through it, I had the thought of it being a compromise of Victoria's morals, but I don't think that's fair, because it's not a degradation, right? It feels like an evolution or an adaptation as Victoria gets more I guess, realistic about the world that she lives in and less idealistic.
Yeah, like to bounce off what you said before, like I think she's maybe still thinking a bit black and white here, and like the law will be okay, and or do what you think is right, and then Goddess kind of teaches her that she may not always know what is right, because Goddess can skew that, and I think this is actually the same time in the story where Citrine becomes the law, like definitely by the end of Arc 9 that's the case. So, like by the end of Arc 9, Victoria is sort of sitting here. And it's like, okay, so the law is now in the hands of Citrine, and I've learnt from Goddess that I can't necessarily always trust myself to know what is right. So all she's kind of got left is to reach out.
Which, honestly, best of the three.
Yeah, absolutely. Works out towards the end of the story. So after Goddess, I've kind of grouped arcs 10 through 12 as this sort of Cradle, Love Lost, March debacle. There's obviously a lot here, especially to do with with all the chopping up of the Navigators, and then eventually what did we call the Undersider Heartbroken Breakthrough Alliance? I forget. Scott and Matt had some sort of funny hybrid name for the whole thing.
Yeah, we're not good at coming up with funny names here.
Yeah. I'll leave you to workshop it as I keep explaining.
We'll edit something back in right here. And you're editing that one, right, Elliot? Because I'm not going to remember to go back and do that.
But yeah, so so there's a lot of stuff here to do with all the chopping up of people sort of taps into Victoria's body issues that come from her time in the asylum. But I think, again, there's a lot more stuff with Cradle and Love Lost back into things. There's again a lot of what is forgivable and what is something society can accept. Cradle, does a shit on that line. March is kind of she's lost touch with reality to the point that you can't just treat her normally. You can't just incarcerate her or something or predict her at all. So it's kind of for me, I think there's a lot of thematic follow-up in 10 through 12 to the Fallen stuff, and I think that's why Cradle and Love Lost coming back works so well, because it's kind of the next step of that, and so they pop up again.
Not just that, I do think the Cradle fight in the, warehousey area thing in that building is one of my favorite parts of this story. The sheer... Wait,
hold on. That's a segment we've got later, and you can get to it there, all right?
Okay, wait. But then for this part, how about the Heartbreakers? Because it's Heartbroken, Breakthrough, and Undersiders. Heartbreakers. Do you want me to do a clean take of that so you can edit it back in?
Yeah, I promise you I'll put it back in.
The Heartbreakers.
Nice.
Anyway, what's the next arc?
Anyway, yeah, so after they sort out Cradle and Love Lost and also March, which was just such a fun moment in the story, that whole March bit.
Well,
was just Wildbow having fun with the audience in a really great way.
The bit where Wildbow first... I mean, he started to do some of this stuff, I guess, in other things, but this to me was the part where Wildbow really started going ham with breaking the format, right?
Yeah.
And we get to the bit later where he does the the colored fingers thing, which is another weird little format break. But the one with Vista, where it's a fake chapter ending, is one of the coolest format breaks I've ever seen, and it's so fun.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Watching the reaction was probably the best bit of people melting down and then finding out it was such a good delivery on exactly what it wanted to do.
I still remember there was a part where one of the top comments right after the chapter came out was what the hell, that can't be the end. And then the next comment was scroll down. And it got so many upvotes.
So anyway, after March gets got by Vista, Space Beats time, we hit in arc 13. And again, I'm kind of grouping 13 through 15 in a bit of a control arc. This is a bit of a loose grouping, to be honest. Arc 13 is the diary situation with the buddy cop stuff with Tattletale.
Yeah.
Then arc 14 is when they end up in prison on Shin. And arc 15 is then fighting Teacher in his base, which is, I think, to my mind, probably the most epic battle. And yeah, like I've sort of grouped these all under like control, and it's a bit loose because like Arc 13, all the stuff with the diary, I saw that as very much a controlling. Oh, Victoria's sort of, losing control over how people see her, like, and that was obviously something that was very important to
Her
Victoria.
image, yeah.
Her image, and that's what gets undermined there. And of course, you get like Tattletale, who's someone who is famous for seeing through bullshit, to show up as sort of the buddy for that one.
Yeah.
And then Arc 14, like, is all about the prison and being put in this foreign culture, and it's about sort of losing that societal freedom. Like, obviously, like a prison, you just straight up have lost a lot of freedoms. But also, like, the fact that it's a foreign one and they're not sure what they can do. And of course, what better way to emphasize like a loss of all sorts of general freedoms than having Amy show up again?
Yeah, this is Victoria's lowest point, right? I would say. Not
just about.
Well, in terms of like, I mean, she doesn't do anything necessarily wrong here, but like the point at which her trauma is the most thrown in her face.
Yes, absolutely. This is one of her toughest personal challenges, I think.
Yeah, and God, was this hard to get through this part.
Yes.
I mean, fuck me. This is like brutally upsetting.
Yeah. 100%. Like Arc 14 is. I've just been re-listening to it in the audiobook, and it's just harsh. It's such a like mentally brutal arc. And then after that, after they do escape from Shin, then they join the teacher raid, and this is very much like Teacher's been pulling all these strings, and again, all this stuff isn't isolated to these arcs. I'm very broadly summarizing them, but again, the whole stuff, all the stuff with Teacher to me is all about like again being able to like control your destiny. Like Teacher is someone who has been pushing nudging everyone into the directions and the places he wants them. And of course that, is perfectly summed up when Contessa shows up as well to, present them the closest thing you can get to a real life trolley problem, by, taking destiny out of their, actually she does the opposite. She puts destiny kind of completely in their hands in a very limited way.
Yeah. In a way that is very much like one of the things I like most about that is they kind of try to question it a bit. Like, what if she's actually trying to do this other thing? And it's so like this. Obviously, I didn't realize this at the time, but it's setting up just how unbeatable Contessa is. Like, she's just so many levels deep that she could be double bluffing you, quadruple bluffing you, sextuple bluffing you, whatever, and it wouldn't even matter because whatever level you engage on with that's her, that's the level she's working on. Exactly. And then that is kind of perfectly setting up Contessa, in air quotes, as one of the major threats that has to be dealt with at the end of the story.
Well, yeah, it's so interesting because essentially what's set up is the only reason Contessa is beatable is because of the blind spots her shards put in. So the second she kind of tightens out into Fortuna, you're like, well, okay, now they're fucked, aren't they?
Yeah, like, but the other thing it emphasizes to me is it emphasizes this idea of like, you kind of just can't play her game. The only way to beat her is not playing the game she's playing. Because you just can't beat her at her games.
I think that's basically what Citrine says at one point. Doesn't Citrine have a moment where she's like, the way to beat Contessa is to hope that or to make sure you're not in a position where she needs to use you. And yeah, I agree. That's so perfect. Like I had been waiting for Contessa to take a more forward role in the series ever since like Worm, and I was so glad that she sort of had this moment of interacting with a main character to this degree. I thought it was really fun. And then basically I've just grouped the last 5 arcs, like 16 through 20, as just kind of the Shard Space and Titans section of the story. Which, like, to me, and I always felt like this was, like, one of Victoria's biggest things, this whole idea of human versus parahuman. And, like, this is something we see, like, she's having this argument with Jessica in Arc 1 or Arc 2 of the story, and Jessica was having this argument with Taylor and fucking halfway through Worm. But Titans represent this complete loss of, like, the human side of you, and even with the ones like Dauntless and Eve, where there's still a hint of the person in them with some sort of action. It's like they're not the person completely anymore. Like, they're mostly parahuman. And it's such a fun representation of this sort of final thing Victoria's been battling, which is, the human versus parahuman part of herself, and finding that balance between her and the fragile one.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. The idea of, I mean, this story culminates in the thoughts around, or not even culminates, is kind of dealing with the idea of what is a parahuman that distinguishes them from a human, and the idea of the traumas that parahumans go through as this kind of defining thing that separates them, and then takes this and says, okay, so if we want to tell a story about kind of reunifying after these traumas, what better way to do it than by making the enemy the literal embodiment of the differences between humans and parahumans?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, they're giant and super fucking powerful as well. So you hit like the fucking awesome side of things as well as the thematic resonance.
Yeah, you get your required dose of kaiju.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like I think this is why that whole concept of the unpowered becoming, parts of the solution throughout these sections of the story feels so right, because it's basically Victoria realizing that human side is actually pretty fucking important, because without it, they're just a shard machine, who's kind of controlled by Contessa. Like, it's the human part of them that makes them important. And that's what they use to beat Fortuna. It's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And then they win, and then what happens?
And then there's the epilogue, which, like, yeah, we might almost talk about it a bit more later, but, like, I really like it as basically the epilogue is the story is over now, but it's going to go on. Like, they still have to push on. Like, the story doesn't end. You keep pushing on, but, Wobbo doesn't need to write about the rest of it.
Yeah, but at least you get some nice, cool birthday parties out of it, too.
Yes.
It all works out.
Yeah, so that's Ward in... looking at it, just under 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's pretty good, I think.
It's about as good as you're going to get, I think, without doing 200 hours.
Yeah, it really makes me realize how much there is in this story. Like,
yeah. Oh, I'm reducing entire, like we didn't even mention Eclipse, Like I just
oh yeah, we didn't. Oh my god, Elliot!
Like that was such a high level summary of the story. It's actually kind of
it's
ridiculous.
Crazy. Like the thoughts that the portals and the fallen raid, and there's a bit where I remember this one fight scene where Teacher had like this pharmacist and was teleporting people in with crazy guns, and
that's in
major malfunctions were there. Yeah. I'm like, oh wait, that was like a major part of the story. There was like a week where that was the most important thing in my life, and that happened every week for 3 years. It's kind of bonkers.
Yeah, well, I think for both of us, this was our first time following a Wildbow story live, right? We binged Worm, and I think you binged Pact, and this was our first time sort of reading a story serially as he releases it, and it's crazy what a difference it makes to how it sits in your head.
Yeah, there's just so many bits to it.
Yes, in fact, speaking of, the next segment is just, what's your favourite bit in Ward, Ruben?
Interesting. Kind of, it's hard to choose because they're all so different, right? Like, if I'm judging based on like my favorite kind of combat or cool power interactions, it might be the Cradle fight, because that Cradle fight, fuck's sake, is so cool.
Yeah, that's the bit I've got. I've just written the Cradle March section. I'm mostly thinking of that bit where that you brought up before, where they're fighting Cradle like in that corner world.
Yeah, and he's got his hand-based technologies.
Yeah, and even before that, there's all the stuff in the forest with his lackeys.
Yes.
There's so much going on, and the march stuff is like the main part that's happening elsewhere, and they start to get like the side effects of that as Kronos pops up and everything. Like there's sort of so much going on, and even the bit before this where they team up with the Heartbroken and the Undersiders, and they split up into the three teams, is some of the coolest shit. Like I loved the interlude structure we fell into there. Darlene's interlude is right up there for me. Like that fucking fight she has against Operator Red, where she's like hurting herself.
Like biting her tongue to throw him off and shit.
It's one of the most insane fucking chapters in this story, which is really saying something.
Yeah.
This arc, the Cradle March stuff, is some of the most visceral part. Is probably the most visceral part of the story, and I just loved it.
I'm looking at the notes, and I swear to God I was going to say this before I saw you'd written it down as well. But Kenzie's interlude also is, I think, a defining part of this story to me. And Kenzie's character, I mean, we'll touch on that in a bit, I think. But Kenzie's stuff, man.
Yeah,
So good.
Kenzie's interlude is my favorite single Wildbow chapter.
Yeah, fair
So
enough.
far. It was so good. I was so excited for the like Martin family dinner.
Oh yeah, we
As
all
it was,
knew it was coming. We all knew it was
and
going to be wild.
it was even better than I hoped. You know, normally like when you get your expectations real high, something can let you down just because you had your expectations too high. Mine were insane for this, and it still met them.
Yep. And a similar thing where expectations were incredibly high and it still met even or exceeded them was finally finding out the story between Byron and Tristan.
Yep. That
Another
was
just incredible pair of interludes, I think it was.
it was a trio in the end, I believe.
Trio of
They had one
interludes.
last one where they flickered between them.
Um, God, what a bit. Yeah, there's just so much cool shit in this book, right? I remember, like, fuck, this is so far back, but in Arc One, this community center thing, when
Yep.
Victoria goes and meets Crystal Clear and Tempura and stuff like that. I can't remember the character's name, but I just remember it's something like Tempura, and that's how I always had it in my head.
I think it's
Um,
Tempera.
yeah, I mean, come on. Like that's I remember reading that first arc as it was coming out and just being like, fuck, this is so cool. Like I'm just so in love with all of these characters so quickly. Like Crystal Clear and Tempera. Um I fell in love with them so quickly. And a bad apple, rotten apple, whatever you want to call her, Fume Hood. That so quickly I was so on board with all of these completely new characters, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And it really just showed to me like this is going to be such a great story. I'm so excited to see where it goes.
Yeah. Yeah, same. It's a very strong opening. I'll admit Glowworm was maybe a bit above where I was at. I
What do
think
you
most of
mean?
it flew over my head.
Right. There was a lot
Uh,
of trying to figure out, hey, who's this? What's this kind of thing?
yeah,
That
and
I think
I think a
it
lot of
helped.
people I think a lot of
Yeah.
people knew Worm a lot better than I did and did a lot better there. I had no idea and I was just kind of reading what to me was just nonsense because I just didn't know enough about what's happening. Whereas, going back to Glowworm now, I love it. But at the time it was just like I was sitting down twice a week and being like, what is what?
But the bit where Kenzie has to take down all her robots, man,
Yeah.
that's incredible. How could you not love that?
No, I love it now. I'm just saying when it first came out, that was like for me the bit where I was like,
Too
is
hard to
this story
follow.
going to be super complicated? And I was glad it was just like I think Wildberg sort of popped on and said, yeah, this is meant to be like a really Galaxy Brain teaser.
Yeah.
That's not his words. I'm paraphrasing.
No, I think that's the kind of thing you would say.
Uh,
The other part that's like that to me is the crystal, like going into the crystal dimension, which is just the kind of
yeah,
stuff that I think as a casual reader, I just found it hard to follow along with, like contextually, like cosmically, what was happening. Like I got the parts that really worked of of that for me were the more human moments where we have confronting Ashley reflections and Victoria reflections and all that good stuff, which I thought was incredible. But the more like galaxy brain stuff, I feel like I'm just when I'm not doing a podcast deep diving on a thing, I feel like I just don't get enough deep into it to understand a lot of these higher level things.
it's so interesting because I found that bit great. Like again, just as a like I was reading Ward. I kind of alternated between reading it as it was coming out and or like falling a bit behind and then binging like 6 chapters at a time. And I found the shard space stuff great. Like I think I followed most of it. It definitely gets. I agree. Like it gets real fucking abstract, and we'll actually get into that a bit at the end of this podcast, I think. But like for me, it was actually the prison arc on Shin that was the bit that I found the hardest to follow. Like
Interesting.
and like I don't think that was the case for most people. So I wonder how much it's just personal things or might have been something to do with the way I read that part or whatever. But like I didn't follow what was happening. I was like, I thought we were going to fight Teacher, and now we're in a prison somewhere. Like
Yeah.
I just individually I just had no idea what was going on.
Interesting. I don't feel like I had that reaction to the prison arc, but maybe that's just because Chris to me is a character that will totally is so compelling to watch that it will just carry me through anything because Chris is just such a bag of craziness in whatever dynamic he's in.
Yeah, for those who don't listen to like our other podcasts, I'm a very much big fan of like just assholes, like you know, kind of cheeky asshole characters, like Chris. Like Chris is just someone who, despite the fact that he was just such a twat for the whole story, I couldn't help but just be like have a smile on my face every time he was in the story.
Mm. Yeah, I wouldn't call Chris a cheeky asshole, but I get what you mean. He's so fun to watch in that way of like
I love to hate him.
yeah, he's shit, but he's shit in a way that is so entertaining to watch him like set up a situation and then fail because of his own shitness.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
it's fun to watch someone get their just desserts and they're not doing anything too terrible. It's not like Amy where it's like you actually can't stand her. It's I mean he does do some pretty heinous things, but it's like he's still incompetent enough that it's fun, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's self-destructing almost as much as he's hurting everyone else, which kind of makes it just more fun.
Yeah, I'll say.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Actually, I mean, speaking of, the next segment was, and I love this. I wrote, "Who's your favorite character and why is it Kenzie?" And I was very glad to see that you actually just agreed that it was.
I
Kenzie.
mean, it is Kenzie. It can't not be Kenzie. Kenzie is such a compelling and interesting and incredible character.
Yeah, I was worried this segment was going to have to be a debate if you'd said anyone else but Kenzie. So this is good.
Like, there's no one else that is on Kenzie's level in terms of so great and so terrible. Like, I think here's what it is. Kenzie is the perfect blend of all of the best like tropes in Wild Bo's stories, right? So, okay, number one, people who have powers that are really incredibly OP, but it's like a struggle for them to not like abuse their powers or be abused by their powers on a personal level. Incredible.
Yeah,
Kenzie is like the example of that in a story full of examples of it, right?
Yeah, she'd almost be my go-to now if I had to explain the monkey paw nature of parahuman powers.
Right, which is a concept that is not unique to Kenzie. That's something that literally every parahuman has.
Yeah. And also, like, I think for me, like, not to get too weirdly personal about all this, but like, I found a lot of Kenzie's particular like struggles and flaws quite relatable. And like, I could just picture myself like, if you got that power and you were her, it's the worst fucking thing, because her whole thing was that she kept like trying too hard to help people and like invade their privacy, and it was like, oh.
Well, yeah, I mean, parahumans.jpg, right? What can you say beyond? It's the classic shards taking your flaws and fucking throwing them back in your face in a hip new way.
And it's just like, yeah, like I could just see myself making my own, like just falling for some of the same mistakes she did with that power. Like it's so, yeah, she got such a rough go of it.
Yeah. So, you know, that's just one of the classic Wildbow tropes that Kenzie is, I think, the best at. Two is, of course, the incredibly horrifying child, a classic Wildbow style, so much so that he based an entire story around a terrible, horrifying child.
I don't think I've read that one.
That's the one you haven't read, but that's, I mean, I haven't read all of it, but I know that's what it's about.
Yeah. Like, I remember like 3 arcs in toward being like, I hope we get a Riley and Kenzie scene, because that will just be fucking hilarious. And I mean, you know, it took right until the end, but
it's so perfect because they're both examples of, we have these incredible powers that have fucked up our lives so much, and we're both learning from each other and advising and helping and supporting each other in trying to be more than that. And it's so beautiful, right?
Well, I think for me, like the link I made between Kenzie and Riley was actually even better delivered on, like their meeting was great, but I actually think I got more out of what I was after through that connection with the whole thing with Gru and Kenzie, which I just, again, and I think this was said a lot when it happened, like, fuck, that came out of nowhere and was just so brilliant. Like that, I think that was that moment where like Kenzie and Gru got put in the same room and started talking, and I was like, fuck, like, of course. Like,
they're perfect. They're literally perfect. And it's the kind of thing where I don't know if Wildbow had this plan all along or it just kind of happened and he was like, oh shit, this is perfect. But it is. It's incredible. Yeah,
it came together. And again, a testament to the power of parahumans in that, like, it doesn't just work on their character level, but like even their powers. Like, Groot was like the one person who could lock Kenzie off from the outside world. And I like that to me is just such a great example of how great these stories are, that their powers overlap in such an interesting way that is just nothing compared to the way their characters, when they started talking, I was like, oh my God, they're going to get so much out of each other.
Well, yeah, and it's only, I think, I don't know how I didn't think of this earlier, but it's only somewhere like halfway through that conversation where Gru's talking about how this is making him uncomfortable. And it took me about halfway through the chapter until I realized, like, oh yeah, Kenzie is just like exactly like the person who completely fucking ruined Gru's life.
Yeah.
Like, of course she is. It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm changing my favorite moment in Ward to that one now.
Yeah, fair
Expect
enough.
me to do that at least 2 more times throughout this podcast.
So yes, the horrifying child trope, another Wild Boar staple that Kenzie exemplifies more than any.
Yep.
The third one is terrible parents, which again, a classic Wild Boar trope, which Kenzie, I think, checks that box completely.
She's got to be right up there.
Yeah. And I would say the fourth one is a character that you can't help but fully support and want to encourage, even as they're doing horrible things. Like, they're doing horrible things and you're like, no, please don't. But they do, and you still just can't help but love them and want to cherish them and help them bloom into a better version of themselves.
Yeah, exactly. You're not hating them for doing the wrong thing. You're just sitting there going, no, please, like, stop. And everyone forgive her and help her get better.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh, no, please don't do that. Okay, you've done it. That's okay. Let's try and move on and grow from it. Right?
We can fix this.
Yeah, exactly. And then the fifth one I want to point out is just a character like making mistakes and trying to improve, right? Like, which is just relatable on so many levels. And Kenzie is a great example of that. Someone who's just trying to be better than they were yesterday. And that's beautiful. And it's this perfect, Kenzie is just the perfect blend of all the best things about Wild Boar stories and even just stories in general, right? And it's therefore definitive proof that she is the best.
Yeah. End of essay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think as well, like something, and this is maybe related to that children who are horrifying thing, but the way Wild Boar was able to use like the cuter parts of her to like make things she did more horrifying, like when she'd hack people and put like smiley emoticons on their screens, was always just fucking comedy gold. There was so much about, like, Kenzie always had so many great lines that were snuck in. Like, I remember there's one, I think it's when Sveta and Weld are breaking up, and Kenzie and Victoria talking about it, and Kenzie just very quickly is sort of like, oh, Sveta's about to come out of the bathroom, like, you better go. And like, I completely missed it the first time, and then like somebody pointed out to me, it's just like, what, Kenzie knew where Sveta was at in, hold on. Like there are so many moments like that where Kenzie just says stuff, and on closer inspection you're like, that's fucking horrifying that she was able to say that.
Yeah. Pretty consistent with Kenzie, I think. There's just these moments, and I think Victoria has those thoughts too of, oh, I really should talk to her about that.
But like, yeah, like even her costume, like she has a little hair bun, so she's got this fucking little like Mickey Mouse sort of look going on, but then they have like eyes, I think, at some point. Wait, so just the idea that she has like extra eyes on the top of her head in her hair buns, it's just like, yeah, she's that perfect mix of like cutesy and creepy, or like the cutesy enhances the creepy in just such a fun way.
Yeah. So yeah, it's Kenzie, and anyone who has any complaints, I mean, study up and you're wrong.
On Twitter.
Yeah, that's all good. Yeah, thanks. What's our next official segment?
The next one is, well, it's a bit fun. What is your favorite new power that showed up in Ward?
Yes. Look, there's a lot of interesting ones. I think the major malfunctions as a group are just full of really interesting powers and really great.
Sorry to interrupt, but I do just need to say what's hilarious about this answer is in our notes, that's not what Ruben has written. What Ruben has done is actually just made a list that went withdrawal, caryatid, finale. I think I just like the major malfunctions.
I mean, yeah.
Like, I love the way that just popped up so organically for me.
When I was thinking, like, oh, who are some really cool new powers that I like? I was like, oh, withdrawal's really cool. Oh, yeah, caryatid. Oh, finale. You know what? They're just all great. Because they are. Like, each of their powers is so unique, and they're such great examples of us seeing, like, the more human side of powers and how it affects people's lives outside of like in a not as explicit way as some of the other main characters that we see, right? Like we learn about Withdrawal's past, we learn about Carrie, Tid, and Finale and the relationship when we're diving into the majors, and it's so good. And Withdrawal's power is so cool. He's just like a big syringe robot juice man from Portal 2, and Carrie Tid turns into a statue and Finale does finger guns at people, and that's all you need. Like, it's great.
Yeah, I think Finale is maybe the most fun of those, just for like the idea that some alien like super being got in her head and was like, you need to point at stuff and make like noises to do explosions. It's just so great.
Yeah, that's what I would do if I was an alien.
I mean, yeah, same.
I didn't mention in my notes as well Crystal Clear, who was a character that I really fell in love with hard at the start. The idea of a Case 53 who just can like pull crystals out of his face and also can just like see things about people through their auras. Just
I actually
awesome.
don't know if he is a Case 53.
Wait, isn't he?
No, like that's actually a thing that comes up. I think World asks him, and he's not, because he can pull the crystals out of his eyes and like appear like, or he can pass for a normal human without the crystals in his eyes. He just kind of stops doing that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Anyway.
But yeah.
Love that power.
Mine's nursery. Like it has to be like
that bit. Oh god. Okay. Talk about favorite bits. You know the bit I'm talking about.
The throat baby.
The throat baby. I mean, god damn. What even happened to Warbo in his past to make him like this?
Yeah, you got to imagine that like the day before he wrote that, he just like, choked on a bit of ham or something, and that just turned into like, he was like, well, what if this was 1,000 times worse?
Yeah, like accidentally choked on a hair and like pulled out a long hair or something by mistake. He was like, well, I can turn this into something horrifying.
Yeah, I mean, especially like, I guess this is why we do like Pact and Pale coverage, because nursery was my like just instant thought for who's the best power in Ward.
You monster.
Like I was just like, oh, nurseries was so cool. I think Darlene deserves a special shout out as well. Like it's such a unique like little twist on the hive mind idea, because it's like the hive body. I don't know. I was actually like, I had a theory running for most of the story that Darlene's power was going to be like crucial to the end, because there was, so many things about like connecting to and understanding people.
Interesting.
That, she's like a more consensual, okay version of Capri in a lot of ways, Darlene.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah. So, I mean, that didn't go anywhere, but like just the concept of her power and watching the chicken tenders like put it into action all these times was just great.
Yep.
And again, her interlude.
Yes. I also liked Lord of Loss, who's just a weird character to like the power of, because he's just like a dude that can turn into 3 different things. It's like a pretty simple, weird little power, but I just thought it's just a cool, like very specific and very unique, and that's quite cool as well.
Yeah, well, can't he turn into more things, but he just sort of doesn't, like. Because there's like a whole thing where like Marquis is giving him like lessons on how to not be so repetitive and shit.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. He's got a niche. It works for him.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't.
Until the end. Yeah. Okay. Well, so for our next bit, let's talk a little bit just about how Ward works as a sequel. Because this is, as far as I sort of know, like the only Wild Bow sequel.
Well, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I was about to say, no, we do a show on another one, Elliot, but I guess it's not technically a sequel.
No, it's a bit different. Yeah, we'll talk about that a lot more at the end. We're going to do a bit of a Pact spoilers thing later, but we'll make sure those of you who haven't read Pact get plenty of warning. But like just, like on a real super simple level, I think we already sort of touched on a lot of this. Like Worm, to me, was looking at about how trauma shapes us into who we are. So like so much of Worm was, hopping into these interludes and saying, oh, this is why this person is the way they are. And then Ward just kind of took the next step and it said, okay, now you kind of understand how these people became who they are. How do, if they're still damaged individuals, how do they approach trying to become better? Like, and what does better mean?
Yeah, I do like the idea that it is a kind of direct, like, extension of the themes in Worm, right? I think there was this kind of fear that I had when we found out, oh, we're going back to the world of parahumans. I definitely had this thought of like, well, but no, you've done that. Like, I don't want to just see the Taylor story 2.0. I don't want to see you just do that again. And it's such an interesting sequel because it takes these themes and says, okay, well, we talked about these things, but what happens next? What are the things that you need to do next after that? And answers that in a very comprehensive and unique way, which I thought, like, to the extent of some of this material, some of the stuff that goes into Ward, I don't think Worm could have been written without some of that in Wildbow's head already, right? Like, without these ideas of this is what should happen next, because it's so thematically appropriate.
I completely agree. Like, one flows into the other so incredibly well. In just about every way, and especially because, like, the other thing I really wanted to talk about here was just how unique the world felt in Ward. Not just, like, compared to Worm, although, like, also compared to Worm. Like, it's crazy how different Ward feels to Worm, just, like, on a world level, considering it is, like, mostly the same people and same places, kind of. But, like, this was such a, at least in my head, like, vibrant and well-lit story. Like, you've got these golden skyscrapers. So much of it was happening in forests. We get to, like, the shard space, which is all sort of, like, crimson. It's just, like, it was such a bright and, in my mind, like, uniquely looking world. And I just think that's so cool to follow on from a story that was, kind of, in a lot of ways, just sort of like our world and various, like, gritty superhero parts of that, and just turn it into, like, a landscape that's kind of unlike anything else I can think of.
Yeah. I was kind of expecting it to be either a bit more post-apocalyptic or a bit more kind of like Western-y style, I guess. Yeah. But it doesn't end up being that. It definitely finds its own unique tone. It's not cyberpunk. It's not post-apocalyptic. It's just kind of damaged future. In an interesting way.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's what it is it's a world that has tried to rebuild itself into exactly what it was and kind of had the means to do it, but not quite. Which, again, I think the city works as a great metaphor for Victoria. I think that's been touched on a fair bit in various places, but I mean, it's even gold colored. Like, there's tons of stuff, I think, linking the health of the city to where Victoria is mentally throughout the story.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Most post-apocalyptic things, it's kind of like back to Western days where it's like, oh, we ride horses, and it's like scavenged parts of the old world. Whereas this is like a haphazardly built new one, just with its own unique color palette that was kind of defined. And it's just like, that's just so cool.
Yeah, I think it works exceedingly well for that exact purpose. I really do like it.
You know what else is great? Just like, as well, I think Wildbow's mentioned, I think in the interview, he talked about this with Matt and Scott. Like, each of his protagonists is a bit of a response to some previous ones, to the previous one. And what's great about Ward being his fourth story is, like, I think Vicky works so well as a response to Taylor as well as she does to Sai,
Sylvester. Yeah,
I haven't really read Twigs, so I'm pretty sure that's him. But like, Victoria, it's just such a great sort of mirror protagonist to Taylor. Like, she was sort of born as a hero and always kind of stuck to that path. Like, was kind of born into the parahuman world, whereas, like, obviously that was not Taylor. And that really shows, like, we already sort of touched on Victoria's mantra. Like, Taylor was someone who was in a lot of ways defined by just the way she hated any authority that wasn't her. And, like, Victoria's mantra literally opens with follow the law.
Yes.
So just, like, immediately just completely opposite ends of the spectrum in how they're approaching the world.
Yeah. No, you're right. I agree. Victoria is a response to Taylor, and I think that's great. And I'm actually so happy that Taylor never showed up in this story. Can you imagine? Yeah. Like, I remember when this story was starting, and this was a conversation we had of, like, man, I hope Taylor doesn't show up. And she didn't. It's great.
Yeah. I also think, like, again, Taylor, another big part of Taylor was the way she could compartmentalize her life. Like, I think that's been mentioned. It's already coming up a lot on Decomposing Worm, which, if you're not listening to, you totally should. Mm-hmm. And I love how Victoria is, like, again, kind of the opposite. Like, Taylor kind of just put her life in boxes and didn't let anything bleed through. Like, she's like, no, that's my civilian life and XYZ. This is my cape life, XYZ. Victoria is someone who has no walls between all that stuff. She has no secret identity. Everything is one. And what she has is all these parts of herself, and she's trying to figure out how to put them into the world. Like, you know, she had the scholar, she had like her old violent self, and it was kind of her. She was looking internally at all the parts of herself and trying to figure out how she wanted to line them up, whereas Taylor was very much kind of doing the opposite and refusing to look at how the various parts of her were lining up.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it makes me wonder, you know, because obviously the humanity versus the cape manity, parahumanity, I guess, is such an important thing in Worm. It actually, in Ward, actually makes me wonder what would it be like if Taylor was the protagonist of Ward and we had this person who had a secret identity and was still balancing things like their human relationship with their father, with their cape life. How would that kind of shape up the story of Ward?
Yeah. Well, I guess, okay, like if we were to sort of think about what Ward would be like if Taylor was the protagonist. So say Jessica had gone to Earth, Aleph found Taylor and said, coach the team.
Yeah.
Like, I think what...
Yeah, you're right. And you know what? I think that, totally. Man, that was a great conversation. I'm glad we talked about that.
Yeah, that Taylor as the protagonist bit went on for a while. Although I think we might lose a little bit of it to that weird audio bug. Hopefully not too much, but
I don't know. My audio's being a little weird, but that's okay. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Great.
I'm glad we had that. It was great. Yeah, that was good. Well, I guess should we talk about? We've talked about Taylor for what do we talk about Taylor for, like 2 hours? Anyway, we've talked about Taylor for a few hours. We talked about Victoria for an hour or so. Let's talk about the next protagonist in Parahumans 3, which is going to be called Wish.
Okay.
Yeah?
Cool. Well, who do you think the protagonist is going to be?
Oh, man, I should have figured out. Who has to do with wishing? Man, I can't remember the name of the cape. The cape, who was the magician cape in Worm? It wasn't Merlin, but it was like, you know who I'm talking about, right?
Wait, Circus?
No, the magician. The one who did magic.
Trickster?
No, you intentionally doing this. He had like pocket dimensions and he could make like water come out of a pocket dimension. It's like, it's a water spell. He was like a fucking D&D. Murden, that's right. I said it was like Merlin, but different.
Oh, I thought you said not Merlin. Sorry.
Yeah, it is not Merlin. It's Murden. It's close enough.
Okay.
That would work. Would that work?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I want it to be Kenzie just because I want more Kenzie.
Yeah.
And it can be called Wire.
Wire. Oh, I like that.
People wearing a wire. She's holding on, being held up by. Yeah, I don't know. There's something there.
Oh,
I'm sure Wildbow would think of something cleverer.
Now I want it to be Crystal Clear because that's the character I want to see more of. Maybe Blindside would be fun. What would a Blindside focused story be like?
I don't think you could do too long a story. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, a lot of this would depend on like, what do you reckon Fortuna wrote in the Crystals? Because I think that would be a thread you'd have to pick up in a Parahumans 3.
Yeah.
Like if it was a main series title.
Well, I don't know. This is the problem, is the message Fortuna wrote in the Crystals was actually just a booty call to her partner. It was just, hey, baby, you up? And so it's not plot relevant. It was just like...
Yeah. My theory is that it was, Abaddon, please come back. Like, take me back. I'm sorry I went to Eden. This was a mistake. This place
I want
sucks.
you back, Abaddon. Take me back. Give me another chance.
No, but like for real, while we're sort of talking about like the idea of a Parahumans 3, it's funny how like I think I sort of said after Worm it'd be okay if there was never any more Parahumans. Like Worm so completely told the story it was telling. There was definitely like the epilogue left this sense of there is a next chapter, but I would have been content with not getting it if that had been the decision Wildbow had made. That said, I'm obviously super fucking glad that we got Ward because it's like amazing. But Ward has this different ending where there's not this sense of that is the end of this chapter and there is another one, but that's separate. Ward kind of ends on this note of, the grind is always going to be there and we just have to keep pushing through.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, there's a sense that like Parahumans 3 would have to pick up in a way. I don't know. Like, Wildbow's cleverer than me, and I already said this about Ward, so he's proven me wrong before. But like, it'd be interesting to see how a Parahumans 3 sort of thing could pick up after Ward's ending and not like a little bit undermine its idea of like pushing through the grind.
I wonder if there's a way to do that. I mean, I would feel like if Wildbow does decide to go back to the Parahumans universe, it would have to not be a continuation of this story. It would have to be something like an alternate thing or a like prequel or, you know, something else taking place during the years between Worm and Ward or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot more stories to tell in the world, absolutely. Whether they're like, you know, sort of Parahumans 3, like post Ward. I mean, I don't have a picture for what that looks like. But again, my original picture for Ward when I found out there was a Parahumans 2 was, this will be like 100 years in the future. And I was off. That. I was off by about 50 times.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Maybe one day we'll see.
Maybe we'll see. So that's all the Ward specific stuff to talk about, right?
Yeah, I think that's sort of everything we wanted to cover here. I mean, if you're interested in more, Matt and Scott covered the story very comprehensively, which is why we're just sort of only touching on some little bits because they've talked about most of what really needs talking about in this story.
Yep. But the one unique take that we can bring to it is comparing this story to another story that we know more about, which is Pact.
Yes, so we're going to dive into that soon. If you just before the rest of you jump out to run away from the Pact stuff, like thanks for listening. If you liked what we're doing here, come check out Pale Reflections. Definitely check out Pale, even if you don't want to listen to more of us. It's very good. And we're having a lot of fun tracking it. So, please give us a try at Pale Reflections. It's available on doofmedia.com or wherever you find podcasts.
Yes, you can also support the Doof Media Network and all the great shows on the network by going to our Patreon. Become a patron at patreon.com/doofmedia.
Yes, and of course, we say it a lot, Matt and Scott say it a lot, so why aren't you doing it? Head on over to patreon.com/Wildbow and, throw him some money for writing these fucking fantastic stories.
Yeah. Now, should we talk about Pact?
Yes.
Pact spoilers ahead. Beware.
If you have not read Pact, it's time to mark this as listened and run away.
Yeah, go read Pact and then come back.
Yeah, that's what you got to do. Mark this as pause thing here. Go read Pact. It'll only take you a couple of days.
Yeah.
That's if you don't stop, and then you can come back here.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so let's start by comparing characters. Is that where we should go? Comparing protagonists?
Yeah, I think like Victoria and Blake as a comparison was just the first thing both of us wrote down because, we already sort of touched on this idea that like Wildbow's protagonists are a bit of a response to the previous one. And if you sort of look at that as a yo-yo between hero and villain, Blake and Victoria are the two heroes.
What are you talking about, Elliot? Blake turns into a literal monster.
I mean...
But no, you're right. He's got a very heroic mindset.
for most of the story. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Victoria and Blake definitely... Like, there were definitely moments reading Ward where I was just like, oh, that's a total Blake move, Victoria, what you've just done there.
But I think the thing that makes it so interesting to me in comparison is, Blake is literally someone who will light himself on fire to keep somebody else warm, right? Like, I'm pretty sure Wildbow, when Wildbow was planning out who he wanted the main character of Pact to be, Wildbow wrote down the sentence, lights himself on fire to keep other people warm, and then thought, now how would he do that? Oh, he'd have to be a tree, and then worked backwards from there. I'm pretty sure it's the exact thing that happened. And Victoria is such an interesting contrast to that because she is that same character, but she much more is challenged on it and learns to move on from it than Blake does. And so it's a response to Blake in such an interesting way because Victoria takes that Blake-ish mindset, I guess I'll call it, and is challenged and grows up from it in such a way that I wish Blake would, but he never does until, I guess, the very, very end of the story.
Yeah, like Victoria has multiple points in this story where like physiotherapists and like, psychiatrists are like chasing her up and being like, hey, you're avoiding our appointments. And, she eventually sort of starts to get on top of that. Whereas like, Blake never reached that point where he wasn't sort of, yelling at them behind him. I just gotta go fight this demon first.
Yeah.
Whereas, like I think Victoria just managed to take those sort of steps to recognize her patterns and start to overcome them, which Blake didn't get to do.
I think one of the major reasons for that is Victoria's story features a cast of people that are all trying to help each other get better, whereas Blake's story has other characters who all want to help each other, kind of, but it's not. The goal of those characters isn't recovery. The goal of those characters is survival, and for Blake that means survival at all costs.
Yeah, you're right. But like, I love what you said about Victoria kind of being the response or the next step to a Blake situation. Like, if Blake had made it long enough, hopefully he could have done a Victoria, basically.
Yeah, and we almost kind of find out that he does in whatever form he ends up in.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think he just manages to hold on to the last parts of himself, whereas Victoria kind of rebuilds herself into something new and better.
She's able to walk back from the edge, I guess, whereas Blake fell off the edge and then tries to climb back up.
Yeah, Rose just kind of glued him back together.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, that's the main thing I want to touch on with the comparing Blake and I almost said Rose, goddammit, and Victoria.
Victoria and Rose. That's an interesting one.
I feel like they're not similar at all.
Rose is closer to the Tattletale. Like, you got Victoria, kind of similar arcs too in a way. Like,
Rose is closer to the Wretch, I think, if we're comparing characters.
Jesus. Harsh.
That's mean to the Wretch. I'm sorry. Let's talk about, because we kind of alluded to the fact that Ward is explicitly a sequel, whereas Pale isn't a sequel, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's worth touching on as well. Whereas this is interesting, and this is maybe going to sound like a criticism, but that's not how I intend it. Ward is a story that explicitly is about themes and even a moral that it's trying to impart, right? Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but it's talking about and exploring explicitly recovery from trauma. And it's got this central kind of theme or like intellectual question that it's trying to talk about. Whereas Pale isn't. I mean, as far as we can tell so far. And Pact also kind of isn't. Has themes, but it doesn't feel like it has this is what this story is explicitly discussing,
I don't know about that. I think the ending of Pact to me kind of condensed down into this idea of like, you need to try to make things better.
Yes.
Like, I would argue that especially the last third of Pact really cements this idea that like just accepting the status quo isn't the way to go about things. Like, it's going to suck and whatever, but like, you can make things better if you just, if everyone just tries, you can make it better.
I agree with that, but it doesn't feel like it's as explicitly a kind of moral as the equivalent themes in Ward feel. I don't know. Maybe that's just my read, and it's not necessarily as true, but it feels right to me.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm not so sure. I agree, but I mean, either way, I definitely I think sort of to what you were saying a bit, like Pale. I don't know how Pale will fit into that.
Yes,
because it's so different as not a sequel. Like we touched on how Worm and Ward, are linked in sort of what they're talking about as sequels. I think Pale is sitting a bit beside Pact, which is maybe why it's not a full sequel. It's sitting beside it. No, not just so Walbo would isolate people who hadn't gone back and read Pact, but also just because he is maybe telling a story that doesn't have to follow on thematically as well.
Yeah. To compare the two a little bit more as well, one thing I really like about Pale is it kind of has the same vibe as the Parahuman stories in terms of the personality that you have and the flaws that your personality has become a kind of important weapon used against you and become an integral part of the way that you operate in this heightened reality world, right? In Parahumans, it's superpowers, and in Pale, it's fucking spooky magic. But I really love, it feels like Pale is doing that in a much more organic way. There's no, as far as I know, space aliens that are, exemplifying the problems with your personality, but it is your personality kind of explicitly manifesting itself through the systems of Pale in a way that I think is very nuanced and cool.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit with Scott during that segment of All Packed Up, which should be on YouTube pretty soon, actually. This idea that, like, in parahumans, you have the trigger event and, like, you shape the power you get, and then that continues to shape you. Whereas in the Pact verse or the other verse, you and the world are like bouncing off each other a lot. Like Pact doesn't, like, you know, with Pact you're constantly having to make choices about who you are, and you can change the sorts of magic you do, and there's consequences when you try to do stuff like that and stuff, obviously. But it's there's a lot more freedom for you to fuck yourself up in different ways in the Pact verse.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and in a way that I guess continues to play off of your character flaws rather than just, or, you know, not necessarily flaws, but often flaws.
Yeah.
As opposed to this one defining moment being the thing that kind of sets your character into stone.
Yeah, I think the other thing I wanted to talk about while we're just like talking about Ward and Pact and similar ideas, like maybe it's just because like Deep Impact was just finishing up a lot of the Abyss stuff as it happened in Ward, but like the shard space felt very pacty to me in some ways in Ward, like just because it was such a symbolic space. Like there were a lot of things about the shard space where it was, you know, as a data bank of like people, it was taking a lot of like the emphasis of those people into how it operated. And like, you know, that just like, you know, nowadays, whenever I see something where, you know, everything's that metaphorical and symbolic sort of made literal, that just sort of says Pact to me, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I do like that idea. I that is obviously something that we've talked about a fair amount. That's one of my favorite things in Pact is the idea of it being a world where the abstract is made literal, and I think that fits very well with the shard space conceptually.
Yeah.
So let's see that in your crossover fictions, everybody. Blake in the shard space. What would happen? I'm just asking.
Yeah. You know, it's bound to happen eventually, I think, in some sort of.
It probably already has. Let's be honest.
But yeah, so I think that's all we've got on Ward.
Yeah, so we've got Ward.
We had Ward too now.
Yeah, we also have got Ward. Is that a thing? We already did the outro. Less. So yeah, true. We already did the outro, so I guess this episode is just going to end abruptly. But thanks for joining, folks. And anything else you want to say, Elliot?
Bye.
Bye.